Defense News. It's proudly sponsored by Navy Federal Credit Union. If you're a member of our nation's armed forces, the Department of Defense, or if your family is, we'd be proud to serve you too.
On this episode of Defense News Weekly, the VA tackles abortion and veteran suicide. Find out how the agency is addressing both issues. And we have a conversation with a wounded Special Forces soldier looking to set an example at the 2022 Warrior Games. And who got $500 million for new Army positioning and navigation tech? Find out in this week's Defense Dollars. And we head to the Air and Space Forces Association's Airspace and Cyber Conference to look at what's happening at this year's event. It's the latest in news and analysis from the Pentagon to the platoon, here on Defense News Weekly. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. I'm Andrea Scott. After the fall of Roe v. Wade, questions swirled about how the Veterans Administration will handle the Supreme Court's decision to deem a federal abortion right unconstitutional. Would the massive health system continue to offer the procedure in states where it's been banned? And as a federal agency, how would Capitol Hill try to regulate that policy for the VA? Capitol Hill Bureau Chief Leo Shane is here to look at the latest developments.
The fight over the Department of Veterans Affairs' decision to offer abortion services to some veterans is heating up on Capitol Hill, with Republicans calling the move illegal and promising they're going to stop it. This stems from earlier this summer, when the Supreme Court overturned the Roe v. Wade decision, which had legalized abortion across the nation. Since then, numerous states have stepped in and outlawed abortion. Earlier this month, the Department of Veterans Affairs said they needed to start offering the procedure in certain circumstances, in cases of rape, incest, or when the life or health of a veteran is endangered. And they said they needed to do that because of the lack of access that veterans were seeing because of those new changes in state laws. Republicans said that the Department of Veterans Affairs can't do this, that existing law outlaws them from providing any abortion services, and they're saying it's pretty clear that this is an illegal move by those administrators.
I believe it is a matter of my faith that abortion is wrong. I also believe, as a matter of law, the VA does not have the authority to offer abortions.
Democrats and Veterans Affairs officials say they feel like they have a strong legal basis for this move because they need it to make sure that veterans have access to health care. As a matter of fact, Veterans Affairs officials expect about 1,000 of these kinds of procedures to take place each year, and they say without that, they're not sure where veterans would be able to get any sort of access.
But as a result of the Supreme Court decision that overturned Roe v. Wade, certain states have begun to enforce abortion bans and restrictions that create urgent risks to the lives and health of pregnant veterans and VA beneficiaries. Therefore, VA modified its regulations to expand reproductive health care. When medically necessary, VA will now offer abortion counseling and provide abortions when the life or health of the veteran would be endangered if the pregnancy were carried to term, or when the pregnancy is the result of rape or incest.
This is a big deal because this is the first federal agency that has offered to provide abortion services since that Supreme Court ruling. And the Veterans Administration is huge. The Veterans Health Administration has hospitals all over the country, including a number of hospitals in places where this procedure has been outlawed. So for some veterans, they will be able to go to get abortion services in a state like Texas, which has outlawed the procedure, but get it on federal grounds and avoid those state laws. While lawmakers sort out that abortion fight, they received much better news from Veterans Affairs officials on their suicide prevention efforts. New research just released by the department found the number of veterans lost to suicide in 2020 was the lowest total since 2006. That's about 650 fewer veterans lost to suicide from 2018 to 2020. The suicide rate in the veterans community decreased by almost twice as much as the civilian rate. And for the first time in 14 years, the rate of deaths was less than 17 veterans a day. Now here's the bad news. It's still close to 17 veterans a day, and veterans are dying of suicide at almost twice the rate of their civilian counterparts. This is a major problem for the veterans community, and the issue has been a major focus of clinical work and support programming over the last decade for VA. VA officials said they're cautiously optimistic about the recent progress, but they also acknowledge there's a lot more to be done to save veterans' lives. Along with the latest announcement, VA announced $52 million in new grants to community groups in 43 states to help with suicide prevention, and another $8.5 million in awards as part of their Mission Daybreak Challenge to seek out new solutions to the problem. One surprise announcement from the recent VA news: the start of the coronavirus pandemic in 2020 did not appear to have a major negative impact on veterans' mental health, as many experts had feared. Researchers said they found no evidence the lockdowns and stress of those early pandemic days resulted in more suicide attempts, in part because of existing support services for veterans. Now, officials are hoping to continue to build on those services in coming years and keep pushing down those suicide numbers further. For Military Times, I'm Leo Shane.
Thanks, Leo. The Warrior Games are an annual opportunity for ill and injured service members and veterans to channel their drive into competitive sports. At this year's event, we spoke to one wounded Special Forces soldier on what drives him to stay in the game. Let's check it out.
Joined in 2006. I joined because I wanted to be a Green Beret. That's all I wanted to do since I was little. Thanks to Rambo, I was just like, hey, I want to be that. And then initial entry into Special Forces, and it's one of the best career decisions I've made and life choices. Multiple deployments. I got done in the end of 2017. I was medically retired. I was injured in 2016.
So what was your injury? What happened?
So I was ejected from a Humvee in a firefight. I did not know initially that my back was broken. I was just like, hey, there's something wrong. It was towards the end of the deployment. I wanted to stay on the team and support what we had going on, which is very common from the unit I was from. I didn't know until I got home. I was like, hey, my legs are starting to give out. I'm having problems. I went over to the Thor 3 program, which is like physical therapy and that we have available to us. And they said, you need to go get imagery, and that's where it all kind of came out.
And what was your recovery process like, and how soon were you able to get into sports and adaptive sports?
From injury is about a year and a couple months before I was able to get back, and even at that, it's very limited. It took probably the longer period to wrap my head around it being permanent, right? The permanence of it, and that's probably the hardest thing to swallow when it comes to just injuries. Mm-hmm. So sit down with a physical therapist that I've worked with over years and then say, this is going to be permanent. It's only going to get worse over time. So do what you can.
Which sports are you competing here at the games, and how do you do that with your back?
I've competed already in standing air rifle and then standing air pistol. I did well, get the standing rifle, I placed 4th, and then I still have, there's an exhibition for golf, and then I'll be competing in archery, which is my passion. How I do it with my back is one day at a time. It's not every day that I can train even for the games, so I take it as I can get it. If I can't do one, then I'll find something else to practice that will help me.
You said archery is your best or favorite sport here. How did you get into that?
I was actually introduced by, there was a military adaptive sports program that I was brought into when I was still in the recovery process. They said, try all these sports and see if it's something that connects with you. I picked up a bow, and that was it. It's a slow, methodical process, and a lot of it is core strength, which helps my back. The sport actually directly impacts my recovery.
So these are your first Warrior Games. What is your biggest takeaway?
Biggest takeaway just in general is community. I see other sports, and I'm like, wheelchair rugby, super awesome, really aggressive, and kind of has that team mentality. It makes me want to participate, cheer for somebody that I know that's competing, that's giving their all on the court, and the other teams. It's important for everybody. So I think that kind of sense of humanity is super important for me.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and best of luck.
Thanks.
When we come back, the identity of the company that got $500 million for an Army tech contract. And later, a highlight from the 2022 Defense News Conference. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. I'm Andrea Scott. There's been a lot of moving and shaking in the defense contracting universe lately. So for a breakdown of the latest, we head to this week's Defense Dollars. The Slovenian Ministry of Defense has announced the country's government will cancel a deal to purchase 45 Boxer armored vehicles with related equipment and services for a total of $343 million from the Intergovernmental Organization for Joint Armament Cooperation. The Central European country instead intends to seek other options to acquire 8-wheel drive vehicles for its land forces. The latest decision is based on the findings of an internal audit commissioned by Slovenia's defense minister in June 2021 after a new government took over. If Slovenia were to proceed with the purchase of 45 Boxers, the ministry would be forced to buy at least 24 more armored vehicles to ensure sufficient capacities for a medium battalion battle group. Raytheon subsidiary Collins Aerospace won a contract worth as much as $583 million to produce the latest version of a technology that provides soldiers critical situational awareness and context on the battlefields. The U.S. Army announced the award on September 8th for the Mounted Assured Positioning, Navigation, and Timing System. MAPS Gen 2 ensures troops understand where they are and where they are headed, even in environments where GPS signal is jammed and other systems are being harassed. The technology will be mounted into a variety of armored platforms, including Abrams tanks, Paladin artillery, and Bradley fighting vehicles. It will also go atop lighter options such as Strykers and Humvees. Colombian President Gustavo Petro has reactivated the process to acquire new fighter jets to replace the country's aging K-4 fleet. Petro's decision may come as a surprise given his stance earlier this year on the campaign trail, when he said the purchase of combat aircraft or other military hardware would not be a priority during his time in office if elected. Why the U-turn? Well, military sources in Bogota spoke to Defense News anonymously to protect their careers. They said the chief of the Colombian Air Force convinced the defense minister about the urgent need to replace at least part of the K-4 fleet, which will begin retirement later in 2022. The defense minister, in turn, persuaded the president. Since 1989, Colombia has acquired 24 K-4 jets, made by Israel Aerospace Industries. Colombia's modernized K-4s are possibly the most advanced fighter jets with the most capable systems in service in South America. But the age of the airframes is taking its toll. Between 2012 and 2014, multiple aircraft were lost in accidents, at one point grounding the entire fleet. Extensive maintenance support from IAI brought the aircraft back to service. In military headlines, the Army's Chinook helicopters are coming back into service following a grounding of the fleet in August. The helicopters were taken out of service for a, quote, abundance of caution after a series of engine fires were reported. The Army said recently that 60% of its Chinooks are now clear to fly, following discovery and replacement of potentially faulty O-rings, allowing fuel leaks in the engines. And the Space Force now has its official song. Semper Supra was revealed in front of a crowd at the 2022 Air and Space Force Association Airspace and Cyber Conference in Maryland. Asked about the song in a media roundtable, Air Force Chief of Staff General Charles Q. Brown Jr. gave the song a compliment.
I'm not going to judge the song, but I'm also kind of biased towards the Air Force song because I'm United States Air Force. So I'm not going to judge the song. I'll let the rest of us judge the song, and I'm sure it'll grow on us as well over time.
Take a listen to the song.
Standing guard both night and day.
Over in the Marine Corps, administrative actions against Marines seeking exemptions from COVID-19 vaccinations for religious reasons have been halted. The move follows a similar Navy policy and comes on the heels of a preliminary injunction by a federal judge blocking retaliation against Marines seeking the exemptions. The guidance applies to Marines who have appealed exemption requests that have been denied, a group that includes about 1,100 Marines. When we return, our personal finance expert gives her latest tips in this week's Money Minute. Welcome back. On this edition of Money Minute, Navy Federal Credit Union personal finance expert Jeanette Mack delivers her latest tips. Have a look.
Having a savings strategy is crucial to any financial plan. If you're parking all your earnings into one account hoping you'll have a savings at the end of each month, you could be selling yourself short both on your bills and your bottom line. Instead, keep what goes out and what should stay in savings separately. Make your savings work hard for your hard-earned money. Most financial institutions have 3 basic types of savings accounts: traditional savings, money market accounts, and certificates. If you're just building your savings and need an emergency fund, a traditional savings account is your go-to account. But if you're looking for an account with a higher return and don't want to lock up your funds, go for a money market savings account. Certificates or CDs earn higher interest returns, but are designed for long or short-term goals, so be sure you can do without those funds until it matures. Bottom line, when choosing a savings account, you've got tons of options. Even small starts can finish big, so whatever you do, make the choice to save.
Thanks, Jeanette. We'll see you next week. To get more coverage of military and defense issues, make sure to check out our headlines online at Army, Navy, Air Force, and MarineCorpsTimes.com and DefenseNews.com. And for fresh headlines in your inbox every weekday, subscribe to our Early Bird Brief. Or if you prefer to get your news on social media, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And when we come back, some of the top stories from the Air Force and Space Forces Association's Airspace and Cyber Conference. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. Our reporters were on the ground this week, tracking the biggest stories at the Air Force and Space Forces Association's Airspace and Cyber Conference. Here's a look at some of the top stories from the event.
The Air and Space Forces Association's annual Air, Space, and Cyber Conference returned to National Harbor, Maryland this week. The conference was buzzing with big topics including aerial refueling tankers, drone wingmen for fighter jets, the planned rollout of the next stealth bomber, and the future of the F-35 fighter's engine. Air Mobility Command announced the KC-46 Pegasus, its latest tanker, had been cleared to carry out all refueling missions around the world such as combat missions, and could refuel all planes. But there's still one exception. The A-10 Warthog, due to a problem with the stiffness of the KC-46's boom that is now being redesigned. L3 Harris and Brazilian aerospace firm Embraer also made a play for the U.S. tanker market, announcing plans to modify Embraer's KC-390 to sell it to the Air Force. L3 and Embraer plan to add boom refueling capabilities to the KC-390, which now uses a hose and drogue system, as well as modernized communications equipment that can meet the U.S.'s latest command and control standards. And they tout the so-called Agile tanker's ability to take off and land from short and rough runways, which they say could come in handy if the Air Force had to set up an improvised base in the field during a future war. The Air Force is also all in on the concept of having autonomous drone wingmen flying alongside fighter jets. Secretary Frank Kendall has made these collaborative combat aircraft one of his top priorities. He envisions about 5 drones using artificial intelligence flying into battle alongside fighters such as the F-35 or the futuristic next-generation air dominance platform. The concept is similar to the Royal Australian Air Force's Loyal Wingman program, which uses Boeing's MQ-28 Ghostbat drone. Companies such as Kratos, General Atomics, and Lockheed Martin are just a few of the other defense firms that have been working on similar programs. The Air Force is looking to have a competition for this program in 2024. The B-21 Raider will have its public debut the first week of December, Air Force Acquisition Chief Andrew Hunter announced. The Air Force's next stealth bomber will have its official rollout at Northrop Grumman's facility in Palmdale, California. Its first flight is planned to follow a few months later in 2023, when it flies from Palmdale to Edwards Air Force Base, where its formal flight tests will take place. And will the F-35 get a new advanced adaptive engine? Pratt & Whitney and General Electric Aviation also made their pitches for the future of the F-35's propulsion system. GE is arguing their next-generation XA-100 engine, part of the Adaptive Engine Transition Program, will provide the thrust, speed, fuel efficiency, and cooling ability the F-35 will need for its latest Block 4 upgrades. Pratt & Whitney is touting the benefits and cost savings of upgrading their F-135 engine, which is currently in the F-35, under their enhanced engine package. Pratt is also working on its own adaptive engine, but says that's a better fit for the Air Force's future NGAD program. Air Force Chief of Staff General C.Q. Brown held a roundtable here. Here's what he had to say about the future of the F-35's propulsion system.
We need to look at whatever the follow-on advanced propulsion is going to be for the F-35, whether it's AETP or EAP. The other piece of this is actually, as they're doing the business case analysis within OSD, is we'd like to get to a decision this year, to get to a point to be able to, which way we're going to go, and then that way we can better invest, to ensure we're going to provide opportunities here in the future.
Those are just a few of the many things that were discussed at AFA's Airspace Cyber Conference. For more coverage on that and other issues, head to defensenews.com. For Defense News, I'm Stephen Losey.
And that's all we have time for this week. Please visit us on militarytimes.com and defensenews.com for more coverage. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week.